two wolves suddenly fell upon a lamb in the woods. As they were about to tear it apart, it asked, "By what right?" "You are tasty, weak, and in the woods," they replied. Soon they had eaten it all. This short poem was written by Ignacy Krasicki, the foremost poet of the Polish Enlightenment, known for his short satires and fables. Krasicki wrote this verse as an allusion to the First Partition of Poland of 1772, in which the allegorical wolves have each taken a chunk of an allegorical lamb. This chunk amounted to about 30% of the praised territory, and about 35% of its population. Although this verse was written at the time when the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was still on the map of Europe, Krasicki's words were prophetic. Indeed, following two more partitions in 1793 and 1795, they had eaten it all. The complete consumption of one of Europe's largest states was not an easy process. Although the partitions would have never occurred without external pressure, they were a result of multiple social as well as political factors. In this video, we will examine this complex topic by following the chain of events that led to the total annexation of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth by the Russian, Prussian and Austrian empires. This video is made available for free thanks to our YouTube members and patrons. We fund our free content through our program of exclusive videos made for our members and patrons, who get 2 documentaries per week not available to the public. Join their ranks and watch the series on the Albigensian Crusade, Fall of Sparta, First Punic War, Italian Reunification Wars, History of Prussia, Biography of Sulla, Russo-Japanese War, Reconquista, Persian Wars and War of Spanish Succession, and much more. All this is made for and with generous donations from our backers. So if you're enjoying our content and want to see more and support the cause of history, consider becoming a YouTube member or patron. Join their ranks via the link in the description and pinned comment to learn our schedule, get early access to all videos, voting rights on future videos, and much more. You will be able to watch more than 100 exclusive videos today. Thanks for supporting us. To better understand the partitions of Poland, we should start, of all places, in Saxony, a relatively small but wealthy and prosperous German state. At the turn of the 18th century, Saxony was ruled by the ambitious Augustus II, whose goal was to turn Saxony into a great European power. His eyes were set on Poland-Lithuania, a large state to the east, in which monarchs were elected for life by the parliament. Plenty of Polish monarchs were foreigners, coming from such places as Sweden, France or Transylvania. Augustus envisioned himself as the next king of Poland, even if it cost him conversion to Catholicism. In 1697, he was one of the 2 major candidates for the throne, competing alongside the Prince of Conti, the cousin of the King of France. The final decision came by force of arms, with Augustus II bringing his Saxon troops to Poland to secure his victory. The highlight of the reign of Augustus II was the Great Northern War. Aiming to conquer Livonia for the House of Wettin, he allied with Russia and Denmark against the teenage King of Sweden, Charles XII. For Poland-Lithuania, this war was nothing short of a disaster. The Commonwealth lost battles, endured foreign occupation, and witnessed the Swedes install a rival king, Stanisław Leszczyński, on the Polish throne. Eventually, Charles XII lost the war, and Augustus II reclaimed the throne of Poland at the point of Russian and Saxon bayonets. However, Augustus's poor showing during the war left his royal position weak, and the king spent the rest of his reign in a struggle against the nobility. Eventually, a fragile compromise was reached, with Augustus II staying in Poland as king, although without his Saxon troops and advisors, and commanding only a small peacetime army of 24,000 men. The death of Augustus II set the stage for one of the most contested elections in Polish history. Stanisław Leszczyński, once a Swedish puppet, suddenly reappeared in Warsaw, wearing a Polish kaftan and attracting massive enthusiasm. Backed by France and a number of noble families, Leszczyński was proclaimed king in 1733. However, a rival candidate, Frederick Augustus II of Saxony, countered Leszczyński by securing an alliance with Austria, Russia and Prussia. Russian armies entered Mazovia and hosted an ill-attended second election, which was predictably rigged to be won by their favoured candidate, Frederick. Heavily outnumbered, Leszczyński fled to Gdansk. France contested the elections, but since their main geopolitical goal at present was expanding their influence in Italy, they ultimately did not prioritize their interests in Eastern Europe. After a short war of Polish succession, opposition to Frederick was crushed by his Russian backers, and he was crowned King Augustus III of Poland. The country he was about to rule was reduced to Russia's de facto state. To secure his new position, the new king had to look for support among the Polish nobility. He found one in the family, a faction centered around the noble house of Rzeczpospolita. Their goal was to win power, introduce reforms, abolish the liberum veto, and reduce the power of the magnates. The liberum veto part was especially important. It was a relic of a long-gone past, a byproduct of the unanimity rule in the parliament. There, a single nay vote was enough to nullify any legislation. Needless to say, any serious attempt to centralize the state would require its abolition. The opponents of the family labeled themselves Republicans, and primarily centered around the houses of Potocki and Radziwiłł. The latter held the Commonwealth's largest private army, more modern and better trained than those of Poland or Lithuania. In foreign policy, the rivalry between the family and the Republicans paralyzed Poland on the world stage. As a result, Poland-Lithuania remained neutral in the War of the Austrian Succession, as well as in the 7 Years' War. In the year 1763, King Augustus III passed away. Russia and its new monarch, Catherine II, used this opportunity to install a loyal candidate to the thrones of the Commonwealth. With assistance from a 30,000-men-strong Russian army, the election was won by Stanisław August Poniatowski, who was the leader of the family and also happened to be Catherine's ex-boyfriend. On the throne, Poniatowski launched an ambitious program of reform. The new king and the family attempted to abolish private armies, codify the law, and increase taxes. It looked as if Poniatowski and the family were on course to completely overhaul the Commonwealth. However, they encountered domestic opposition and also lost the support of Russia. In Radom, the Republicans, led by the Polish nobleman Karol Stanisław Radziwiłł, proclaimed a confederation, aiming to dethrone Poniatowski. The Russians initially sided with the Republicans, but eventually flipped their allegiance, striking a deal with the family. In 1768, the parliament passed the Fundamental Laws, which guaranteed free royal elections, liberum veto, and the right of rebellion, and which could only be repealed by a unanimous vote. Catherine II gave her guarantees to those laws, thus ensuring that any Polish attempt at reform would have to gain Russian approval. With the alliance between Poniatowski and Russia restored, a new rebellion sprung up. In the Podolian fortress of Bar, a group of Polish nobles proclaimed a new confederation. They called for the deposition of the king, the expulsion of the Russian armies from Poland, and the repression of the non-Catholic nobles who tended to support St. Petersburg. These confederates appealed to the patriotism of their countrymen, and the revolt spread throughout the Commonwealth. Russian and regular Polish armies overpowered the rebellious units, only to witness them spring up elsewhere as partisans. The Bar Confederates received support from the Ottomans, France and Saxony, and proclaimed a government in exile in Austria. On November 3, 1771, they managed to kidnap Poniatowski, yet the king convinced his captors to release him. For the Confederates, this episode turned out to be a blunder. Their foreign allies were not fond of them assaulting a recognized monarch. Consequently, all of them, except for the Ottomans, withdrew their support. Soon, the War of the Bar Confederation was over. Parallel to the events of the Uprising, Russia was waging a highly successful war against the Ottomans, seizing Crimea and occupying the Danubian principalities. It looked as if Russia would emerge from the war a lot more powerful, something which other European great powers were not happy about. Austria proposed a diplomatic approach. If Russia were to gain land, then in order to preserve the balance of power, her rivals were to gain land too. Prussia, fearing another big war in Europe, proposed to satisfy the great powers at the expense of Poland. France found the idea acceptable, since it would redirect Russian ambitions away from the Ottomans. Russia, for its part, was reluctant to share the lands of its Polish puppet state with the Germans, but eventually conceded, being too busy fighting in the Balkans to make too much of a fuss. In August 1772, Austria, Prussia and Russia finalized the Partition agreement. Their armies, already standing in the Polish-Lithuanian territories due to the ongoing rebellion, took control of about a third of the Commonwealth. Their ambassadors demanded the Polish parliament ratify the partition, under the threat of force. Eventually, the Poles submitted. For the next 16 years, the Commonwealth was allowed to exist as Russia's client state, technically governed by Poniatowski and his supporters, but in practice it was run by a Russian ambassador and the corrupt nobles he kept on his payroll. Things changed, however, once Russia got distracted by yet another war against the Ottomans. In its wake, Poniatowski met with Catherine II and offered to join the war on Russia's side in exchange for the region of Moldavia. Catherine declined the offer, but allowed Poniatowski to host a confederated parliament under the assumption that it would help raise some resources for the Russian war effort without the need to go through a unanimous vote. This parliamentary session would last for an astounding 4 years. The opposition to the king now included not only the Republicans but also the family, which decided to make a stand against its former leader. United, they now called themselves the Patriots. They were on a mission to end Poland's subservient status, dressed themselves in traditional kaftans, and had support from Prussia. 1 week into the parliamentary session, Prussia denounced the Russo-Polish alliance and withdrew its guarantees of the fundamental laws that forbade Poland from abolishing liberum veto. The path to reform was seemingly open. Throughout those 4 years, the Great Parliament passed a wide variety of laws and reforms. It culminated on May 3, 1791, adopting a new Polish constitution. It completely overhauled the state. The Commonwealth became a modern constitutional monarchy, and a much more centralized one. Liberum veto was abolished, as well as most of Lithuania's autonomy. The May 3rd Constitution would later become the most celebrated document in Polish history. Not everyone was happy with the new arrangement. Chief opponents of the constitution, Count Szczesny Potocki and Hetman Seweryn Dziewuski, travelled to St. Petersburg to plead with Empress Catherine for support. There they organized a confederation, which aimed to annul the constitution, as well as all of the most recent parliamentary achievements. The act was made public in the small Ukrainian border village of Targowice, the word that in the Polish language became synonymous with treason. Russia entered the conflict on the side of the Confederates. During this time, the French Revolution was sending political shockwaves throughout the monarchies of Europe. Leveraging this, Empress Catherine claimed that Poland had succumbed to the same revolutionary spirit that had taken over France, and used this to justify recalling the fundamental laws she pledged to guarantee. Prussia, also spooked by the French Revolution, and already reconciled with Austria and Russia, provided no support to Warsaw. The Poles were left alone. The Poles put up a spirited resistance against the Russian invasion. The king's nephew, Prince Józef Poniatowski, led the Polish forces in Lithuania, while Tadeusz Kosciuszko won several victories in the south. However, in the end, the more numerous, more professional, and better equipped Russian troops broke the Polish resistance in a matter of months. Catherine II then proceeded to break her promises to the Targowice leaders and agreed with Prussia to partition Poland again. The Polish parliament, once again surrounded by Russian bayonets, ratified the Second Partition and annulled most of the reforms that had been ratified in the May 3rd document. Despite this, the Commonwealth would fight for its survival one last time. After the Second Partition, Polish patriots gathered in Dresden to plot an insurrection. This revolt would be different. Instead of relying on dissident nobles and their private armies, they would raise masses of able-bodied men from all social classes, like the Americans and the French did during their respective revolutions. The uprising would be led by Tadeusz Kosciuszko. Of all the Polish-Lithuanian officers, Kosciuszko had the most experience. He fought in the American War of Independence as a military engineer, having built the Patriot fortifications at Saratoga, as well as permanent fortifications at West Point. The preparations were complete by 1794. In March, a Polish cavalry unit in Kraków disobeyed an order and left the city, forcing the Russian garrison to chase it. In its absence, Kosciuszko appeared in Kraków and proclaimed a revolutionary government. He took command of the local forces, raised a levy, and engaged the Russians at Rzeczpospolita. Thanks to the heroic last-minute charge of peasants armed with scythes, the Poles carried the day. 2 weeks later, the Polish troops in Warsaw revolted and expelled the Russian garrison, joining the rebellion. Vilnius followed less than a week later. The new Polish government that formed in the wake of this insurrection would have nothing to do with the old. Kosciuszko was declared dictator, and set out to impose drastic measures to secure the independence of his nation. On May 7th, he proclaimed the Poniatowski decree, abolishing serfdom and reducing labour obligations for peasants. The nobles were not happy, but in the face of existential danger, they had little choice but to submit. The radicals went even further. Soon after the proclamation of Poniatowski, they broke into Warsaw's prisons and hanged 4 Targowica leaders after a short kangaroo court. However, this insurrection would ultimately not last for long. On June 6th, the Prussians intervened, and jointly with the Russians, defeated Kosciuszko at Rzeczpospolita. The Allied army captured Kraków. After this, Austria, not wanting to be left without spoils again, joined in on the conflict as well. Meanwhile, an overwhelming Russian force came from the east, which Kosciuszko faced down to either triumph over or perish against in a blaze of glory. At the Battle of Maciejowice, the Poles were defeated, with Kosciuszko himself wounded and captured. The last battle of the revolt occurred on November 4th at Praga, a suburb of Warsaw. After a short siege, Russian troops under Suvorov captured the suburb, looted it, and slaughtered civilians to such a scale that the event was dubbed the Massacre of Praga. This was the end for the Commonwealth. Catherine II refused to keep it as a buffer state or as a puppet, instead agreeing with Prussia and Austria to divide what was left. Its last king, Stanisław August Poniatowski, abdicated on November 25, 1795, and died less than 2 years later in St. Petersburg. He outlived his ex by about 3 months. After the third and final partition, Poland ceased to exist as a state for over a century. Yet her fight was not inconsequential. This struggle against overwhelming odds gave Poles a potent legend, a sign that Poland is not yet lost as long as they live, words imprinted in the Polish national anthem. Moreover, its struggle kept Prussian and Austrian troops distracted in the east while the French Revolution was raging, arguably saving the revolutionary cause in that country. In 1807, the scion of the French Revolution, Napoleon Bonaparte, recreated some semblance of Poland, the so-called Duchy of Warsaw. Prince Józef Poniatowski became its chief of the army and was promoted to Marshal of France during the Battle of Leipzig. He died in the same battle 3 days later. Kosciuszko was initially sent to Siberia, but was released by Emperor Paul I. He largely retired from public life, skeptical of Napoleon's project. Kosciuszko died on the 15th of October 1817 and is now considered a national hero of 4 different countries. The new head of the family, Adam Jerzy Czartoryski, tried to reconcile with Russia, and under Alexander I even became the Russian foreign minister. Thanks to his efforts, the Tsar agreed to form Congress Poland, a state in a personal union with Russia with its own government, army and constitution. The Tsars, however, repeatedly ignored those arrangements, gradually turning Congress Poland into a mere formality. Czartoryski fell out of favour and was exiled to France, where he became the leader of the Polish émigrés. They would not see their countries liberated until the end of World War I. We always have more stories to tell, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see them. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Recently, we've started releasing weekly Patreon and YouTube member exclusive content. Consider joining their ranks via the link in the description or button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.